The Chinese government's extreme lockdown measures during the 3-year epidemic and its crackdown on private enterprises in recent years have led to many small and medium-sized business owners going bankrupt. As a result, their children studying overseas are trapped with no money to pay for their education. Today, we will talk about this issue. Some students are forced to return to China or take up part-time jobs to support their education as their families can no longer support them. Some rich kids have taken up part-time babysitter positions to pay for their studies. Earlier this year, a post on social media Reddit asked for help. The person said, "I've been so anxious lately that I can't sleep. The tuition fee for the next semester plus living expenses will cost about 200,000 yuan. Meanwhile, something happened to my family and they can't give me money anymore. I am a graduate student in the US and I still have 1 year to go before I graduate. The options I have are either to take a break and go back to China to work and earn money, but I can only take a break of up to 1 year. It's very unlikely that I will be able to save enough money to pay for my tuition fees with the level of income I earn in China, and I may not be able to come back to the US. If I apply again, I won't be able to provide proof of funding or the I-20 form as my family isn't financially able anymore. The other option is to borrow money or take out a loan to pay for the tuition, but even if I get enough for the next semester, there's still the following semester to come. So it feels like a bottomless pit. I really don't want to go back to China. Now I'm even thinking of staying here illegally. I was politically depressed in China for a few years before the epidemic. Only after I left China did I finally feel free. But now I'm really desperate and I don't know what to do." He says he has started working illegal jobs, but the money he earns is a drop in the bucket. He consulted his school, which said there was no financial aid for international students. Many netizens gave him tips. Teaching at a school can reduce tuition and get paid. If you study design, you can work as a freelancer. You can save money on rent by sleeping in the living room, renting a couch, or living in your car and showering at the gym. The 3-year epidemic and the CCP's crackdown on private enterprises have had the greatest impact on small and medium-sized business owners. The vast majority of families who have defaulted on mortgages are people working in the real estate, education, and training industries or running factories. If the family situation changes suddenly and the funds are cut off, should the student go back to China or stay overseas? Zhang Lu, a sophomore at the University of California, San Diego, was faced with such a choice, and eventually she chose to stay. According to overseas media reports, Zhang's mother used to run 5 K-12 private schools in China, but the Chinese authorities cracked down on the education industry and her mother lost all her schools. Later, her mother switched to investing in the food and beverage industry and lost a lot of money. When business used to be good, Zhang loved a vacation with her girlfriends, sometimes staying in a hotel for a week that cost 900 a night. Now she has to turn down invitations from her friends. Her mother had put away several $1,000,000 for her education and business, but when things went sour, at first the money for her business was gone, and soon the money for her education was also gone. Her family had to sell the self-occupied home and use pensions to pay for her education. Should she go back to China? Zhang eventually chose to stay and continue her studies, eating only 1 meal a day, taking free meals offered by various organizations during holidays, and collecting expired food from the school. However, some students have chosen to go back to China and start all over again.
At age 22, I drove a sports car to school, living in one of the busiest cities in the US, surrounded by rich and famous friends. But all of that disappeared overnight, and my family went back to the way it was before the liberation. When I got the news about my dad, I spent the next week surrendering my apartment, selling my car, and packing up to return to China. It took me a year to go from crying all night, depressed, and unable to accept reality, to realizing the reality and getting back on my feet. After returning to China, I felt that my life had collapsed overnight. I lost all my competitiveness among my peers because I didn't graduate with a degree from overseas, and I only have a high school diploma in China. Then I went to take the adult self-education exam, went to college, and then went to get a bachelor's degree. In the end, you will realize that being out of school and being broke aren't the worst things in the world. 跟破产并不是这个世界上最糟糕的事。
The interruption of education has been very common since the beginning of the epidemic. As businesses in China closed and went bankrupt, many overseas Chinese students have to go back to China because their families can't afford their education anymore. However, without academic qualifications, it's very difficult for them to find a good job in China. How bad is it to go back to China after cutting off one's overseas education? There are always one or two students we know who have to go back to China when their families are bankrupt and can't pay for their education anymore. Those children who were born with a silver spoon in their mouths had a smooth life before, but it all fell apart overnight. People may think that if they don't have money, they can just stop their studies and go back to China, but the reality is much more cruel. First, if you drop out of school in the middle of the year, the investment you made in the early stages will be wasted, not to mention the fact that universities in China won't accept transfers from abroad. You won't be able to get a decent job without a degree, even if you have the experience of studying abroad, not to mention the devaluation of academic qualifications. Overseas bachelor's degrees used to be in demand in the last 10 years, but they are now all over the place. It's now common for overseas graduates to earn 4,000 to 5,000 yuan a month when they return to China, not to mention people without academic credentials. China's domestic employment environment is getting worse, and students returning to China have no advantage. They are helpless but have to face this reality.
I went to Australia to study in 2014, and I majored in marketing at that time. It cost 1.3 million yuan for the 4 years of my undergraduate studies. I remember that 80 to 90% of the 41 students in my class were Chinese. In fact, my family isn't rich. I'm not the second generation of the rich, but my parents sold their old home and got more than 2 million yuan, of which 1.3 million was given to me to fund my education, and the rest of the money was used for the down payment of a new home. After returning to China, I was looking for a job, but did not expect to hit a brick wall everywhere. Many companies told me, "Now you have no advantage in comparison. In the past, people like you had the advantage of better English, but now the graduates of top universities in China, their English isn't bad, and their overall abilities are better. So us, the returned overseas graduates, have no more advantage." Finally, I found a job as a consultant for overseas studies with a monthly salary of 4,000 yuan. I figured out that even if I didn't eat or drink, I would have to work for 26 to 27 years to make up for the 1.3 million. I originally thought that when I came back from studying overseas, I would be able to go in and out of office buildings in a suit and go to work as a leader. But I didn't realize that I would end up in this situation.
While overseas Chinese students enter financial difficulties, the US and the UK have been raising tuition fees, making things worse. According to a recent report, tuition fees at US universities have risen dramatically for the 2023-2024 academic year compared to 20 years ago, in some cases even doubling. At Britain's top universities, students are paying even more. The UK government has frozen the tuition fee cap for local students, and tuition fees paid by international students are an important source of income for universities. According to China's Ministry of Education, in 2018, about 90% of Chinese students studying abroad were self-funded, rather than relying on scholarships or government subsidies. If your family suddenly goes bankrupt while you're studying abroad, what should you do? On March 26, the Douyin blogger Xuan offered 3 suggestions. I hope that my friends in front of the screen won't encounter this kind of thing, but if you do encounter this kind of situation, what should you do? Is it to continue to bite the bullet and study until graduation, or to quit in time and go back to China? I think it depends on the specific situation. For those who study abroad for a bachelor's degree, I am in favor of prioritizing the education, because if you don't finish your bachelor's degree, you don't have a degree. If you go back to China, your competitiveness can be imagined. For those who go abroad to study for a master's degree, at least there's a bachelor's degree to fall back on. What can you do if you have no money? In fact, there are still 3 ways to choose. The first one is that you can sell your valuable luxuries. This is a true story of my friend. She was born in the 2000s and was still in her junior year of college when one day she suddenly learned that her family went bankrupt. She couldn't afford to pay the tuition for the last semester of her college education. It just so happens that I have a good friend in France who is in the second-hand luxury goods market. She sold all her luxury handbags. Do you know how much she got? In the end, she received more than $300,000, which is enough for her tuition and living expenses. That's to say, we can buy some luxury goods that hold value. They can be traded in case of emergencies. The second way is to find a way to earn money on the side. This is also a true story of a student I know. He is a male student and was born in the 2000s. He started delivering food and eventually earned his tuition. Thirdly, you can switch schools. Don't care about the university ranking. It's your priority to finish school and get a degree. Get your bachelor's degree first. You can go to the cheapest Malaysia and study in a public university which costs only $80,000 to $120,000 a year. And you can also look for part-time jobs there. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and comment. See you next time.